The December rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Luminosa, turning downtown Chicago into a watercolor of bleeding neon and reflected streetlights. My hands trembled as I balanced the tray of champagne flutes, the crystal catching the warm glow of the Edison bulbs overhead. I was exactly 17 minutes late for my shift, and Marco, our floor manager, had that look in his eyes, the one that said, "One more mistake, and you're gone." "Emma, where the hell have you been?" he hissed, intercepting me before I could disappear into the kitchen. His fingers dug into my elbow, pulling me aside near the coat check, where the music from the dining room became a muffled pulse. "I've been calling you for the past hour." "The L broke down at Clark and Lake," I said, which was true. What I didn't mention was that I'd been sitting in that stalled train car having a full-blown panic attack, my ex-boyfriend Derek's latest text messages burning through my phone screen. "I know where you work now. We need to talk." 3 months since I'd fled our apartment at Lincoln Park with nothing but 2 suitcases and my grandmother's pearl earrings, and somehow he'd still found me. Marco's expression shifted from anger to something worse, fear. "Listen to me very carefully, Emma. Table 12, VIP section. You're covering for Jessica tonight." My stomach dropped. "That's the main floor. That's not my section. Coat check-in, backup service." "Jessica called in sick." He gripped both my shoulders now, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "These people, Emma, these aren't regular customers. Mr. Castellardo's party." The name meant nothing to me then. I was 26 years old, fresh off a breakup that had left bruises on my wrists and a hole in my savings account, working 3 jobs to afford a studio apartment in Pilsen that smelled like mildew and disappointment. I'd been in Chicago for 8 years, ever since Northwestern, and I'd learned to keep my head down, blend into the background, become invisible. Invisible had kept me safe. Invisible had kept Derek from finding me for 3 months. "Who's Mr. Castellano?" I asked. Marco's eyes darted toward the private dining area at the back of the restaurant, separated from the main floor by frosted glass panels etched with Italian phrases I'd never bothered to translate. "He's the owner. He's here tonight with associates. Business dinner. You serve, you smile, you don't ask questions, you don't remember anything you hear. Understand?" I didn't understand, not really, but I needed this job. My student loans were crushing me. My grandmother's medical bills from before she died last year were still in collections, and the restraining order against Derek had cost me $1,500 I didn't have. So I nodded. "Good," Marco released me, smoothing down his tie. "Professional, efficient, invisible." That word again, my specialty. I straightened my black skirt, tucked a strand of honey blonde hair behind my ear, and took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. Then I pushed through the doors into the main dining room. Luminosa was beautiful, in that calculated way expensive restaurants always are. Exposed brick walls, vintage Italian posters in gilt frames, tables draped in cream linen with single roses in crystal vases. The kind of place where entrees started at $60, and the wine list required a sommelier to navigate. I'd worked here for 6 months and never once been allowed to serve in the main dining room. Until tonight. The private area at the back of the restaurant was dimmer than the rest of the restaurant, lit by candles and a single chandelier that cast dancing shadows across the walls. As I approached, I could hear male voices speaking in rapid Italian, the words blending together into a rhythm that reminded me of my grandmother. She had immigrated from Tuscany as a young woman, married my grandfather in Boston, raised my father speaking both languages. I'd grown up bilingual, though I rarely used Italian anymore. It reminded me too much of Sunday dinners at Nona's house, of her gnarled hands making fresh pasta, of a time before she got sick and I had to watch her waste away at a hospice bed while Derek convinced me not to visit as often because it was too depressing. I shook off the memory and knocked softly on the frame of the open doorway. 6 men sat around a circular table, all in suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They stopped talking immediately. 6 pairs of eyes turning toward me with varying degrees of interest and assessment, but only one gaze held mine, and I felt it like a physical touch. He sat at what my brain registered as the head of the table, though that made no sense for a round table. Late 30s, maybe 40, dark hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble and then given permission to breathe. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw shadowed with stubble that was too perfect to be accidental. Eyes so dark they were almost black. Intelligent and utterly cold as they studied me. I forced myself to look away, to remember Marco's instructions. Professional, efficient, invisible. That word again, my specialty. I straightened my black skirt, tucked a strand of honey blonde hair behind my ear, and took a breath to fresh as paint. Then I pushed through the doors into the main dining room. Luminoso was beautiful in that calculated way expensive restaurants always are. Exposed brick walls, vintage Italian posters in gilt frames, tables draped in cream linen with single roses in crystal vases, the kind of place where entrees started at $60 and the wine list required a sommelier to navigate. I'd worked here for 6 months and never once been allowed to serve in the main dining room. Until tonight. The private area at the back of the restaurant was dimmer than the rest of the restaurant, lit by candles and a single chandelier that cast dancing shadows across the walls. As I approached, I could hear male voices speaking in rapid Italian, the words blending together into a rhythm that reminded me of my grandmother. She had immigrated from Tuscany as a young woman, married my grandfather in Boston, raised my father speaking both languages. I'd grown up bilingual, though I rarely used Italian anymore. It reminded me too much of Sunday dinners at Nona's house, of her gnarled hands making fresh pasta, of a time before she got sick and I had to watch her waste away in a hospice bed while Derek convinced me not to visit as often because it was too depressing. I shook off the memory and knocked softly on the frame of the open doorway. 6 men sat around a circular table, all in suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They stopped talking immediately. 6 pairs of eyes turning toward me with varying degrees of interest and assessment, but only one gaze held mine, and I felt it like a physical touch. He sat at what my brain registered as the head of the table, that made no sense for a round table. Late 30s, maybe 40, dark hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble and then given permission to breathe. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw shadowed with stubble that was too perfect to be accidental. Eyes so dark they were almost black, intelligent and utterly cold as they studied me. I forced myself to look away, to remember Marco's instructions. Professional, efficient, invisible. "Good evening, gentlemen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm Emma, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start with drinks?" I moved around the table, taking orders, hyper-aware of the head man's eyes following my every movement. When I reached him last, he didn't immediately respond. "You're new to the main floor," he said, not a question. His voice was low, smooth, with an accent that wasn't quite American, but wasn't quite anything else either, like he'd grown up everywhere and nowhere. "Yes, sir. 6 months with the restaurant, first time serving this section." I kept my pen poised over my pad, professional distance in every line of my body. 6 months. He repeated it like he was tasting the words. "And before Luminosa?" The question felt like a test. "I worked at a gallery in River North. Before that, I was finishing my master's degree at Northwestern, art history." Something flickered in those dark eyes. Not quite approval, but interest. Northwestern. Impressive. What's a woman with a master's degree waiting tables? The answer was too complicated, too raw. Student debt, a bad relationship that had cost me my job when Derek showed up at the gallery drunk and screaming, a blacklist in the Chicago art world because apparently domestic violence victims were too much drama for prestigious institutions. "The economy," I said, simply, deflecting with a smile that might crack my face. "What can I get you to drink, sir?" "Macallan 25. Neat." He continued to study me for another beat, then waved his hand dismissively. "That will be all." I nodded and turned to leave, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the room could hear it. When I pushed through the door back into the main restaurant, I finally allowed myself to breathe. "How'd it go?" Marco materialized beside me, his usual composure cracked with anxiety. "Fine, just drinks orders." I handed him my pad to send to the bar. Who is he really, Marco? What's going on? Marco glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Vincenzo Castellano. He owns this restaurant, and 4 others in Chicago and probably half the commercial real estate in the West Loop. Pausing, and if the rumors are true, a lot of other businesses that aren't exactly legal. My blood went cold. You're saying I'm saying he's an important man with important friends, and we don't ask questions. Marco's voice was firm, final. Get the drinks, serve the dinner, keep your head down.
I spent the next 2 hours doing exactly that, moving in and out of the private dining room like a ghost. I brought drinks, appetizers, entrees. I refilled water glasses and wine. I cleared plates. The men's conversation flowed around me in a mixture of English and Italian. Business talk about shipping contracts and real estate developments and city permits. Nothing that sounded illegal. Nothing that explained the fear in Marco's eyes. But Vincent Castellano watched me. Every time I entered the room, I felt his gaze tracking my movements. When I leaned between 2 of the men to place a dish, I caught the scent of his cologne, cedar and something darker, something that smelled like power and money and danger, all mixed together. It was past 11 when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I was standing against the wall of the private dining room, waiting to see if anyone needed anything, trying to be invisible. But when I glanced at the screen, my heart stopped. Derek, I'm outside your work. I just want to talk, Emma. Please. My hands started shaking. I looked toward the frosted glass that separated the private room from the main dining area, as if I could somehow see through the restaurant, through the walls, to the street outside where my ex-boyfriend was waiting. Stalking. Violating the restraining order I'd spent everything I had to get. Then the phone rang. Not Derek. The hospice, where Nana had spent her final days. The one that was still sending me bills I couldn't pay. I'd given them this number because it was the only one I had, even though I wasn't supposed to take personal calls at work. I looked at the table. The men were deep in conversation, papers spread between them, voices intense but controlled. They wouldn't notice if I stepped just outside the door for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds to tell the billing department I'd make a payment next week, I promise. Just please stop calling me at work. Before I could talk myself out of it, I answered, stepping back toward the doorway, my voice dropping to barely a whisper. Pronto, I said automatically, the Italian slipping out the way it always did when I was stressed, when I was thinking about Nana, when I was scared. Sì, capisco. Non posso parlare adesso. I realized my mistake immediately. The entire table had gone silent. All 6 men were staring at me. But Vincent Castellano's expression had changed. The cold assessment was gone, replaced with something sharper, more focused. His head tilted slightly, like a predator catching an unexpected scent. Mi dispiace, I stammered into the phone, my face flushing hot with embarrassment. I have to call you back. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. I apologize for the interruption. Are you ready to order dessert and coffee? But Vincent Castellano was still watching me with that new intensity, and I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. I just didn't know what kind. The rest of the dinner service passed in a blur of anxiety. I brought coffee and tiramisu, grappa and amaretti. The men's conversation had shifted, become quieter, more guarded. Or maybe that was my imagination, my paranoia triggered by Derek's text and the way Castellano kept looking at me like he'd just discovered something valuable and unexpected. It was past 11 when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I was standing against the wall of the private dining room, waiting to see if anyone needed anything, trying to be invisible. But when I glanced at the screen, my heart stopped. Derek, I'm outside your work. I just want to talk, Emma. Please. My hands started shaking. I looked toward the frosted glass that separated the private room from the main dining area, as if I could somehow see through the restaurant, through the walls, to the street outside, where my ex-boyfriend was waiting. Stalking. Violating the restraining order I'd spent everything I had to get. Then the phone rang. Not Derek. The hospice, where Nana had spent her final days. The one that was still sending me bills I couldn't pay. I'd given them this number because it was the only one I had, even though I wasn't supposed to take personal calls at work. I looked at the table. The men were deep in conversation, papers spread between them, voices intense but controlled. They wouldn't notice if I stepped just outside the door for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds to tell the billing department I'd make a payment next week. I promise, just please stop calling me at work. Before I could talk myself out of it, I answered, stepping back toward the doorway, my voice dropping to barely a whisper. Pronto? I said, automatically, the Italian slipping out the way it always did when I was stressed, when I was thinking about Nana, when I was scared. Sì, capisco. Non posso parlare adesso. I realized my mistake immediately. The entire table had gone silent. All 6 men were staring at me. But Vincent Castellano's expression had changed. The cold assessment was gone, replaced with something sharper, more focused. His head tilted slightly, like a predator catching an unexpected scent. Mi dispiace, I stammered into the phone, my face flushing hot with embarrassment. I have to call you back. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. I apologize for the interruption. Are you ready to order dessert and coffee? But Vincent Castellano was still watching me with that new intensity, and I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. I just didn't know what kind. The rest of the dinner service passed in a blur of anxiety. I brought coffee and tiramisu, grappa and amaretti. The men's conversation had shifted, become quieter, more guarded. Or maybe that was my imagination, my paranoia triggered by Derek's text and the way Castellano kept looking at me like he'd just discovered something valuable and unexpected. It was almost 1 a.m. when they finally began to gather their things. I presented the check in a leather folder, and Castellano didn't even glance at it before handing me a black Amex. When I returned with the receipt, he signed it with a flourish, then held it out to me, his fingers lingering just a fraction too long as I took it. Grazie, Emma, he said. My name sounded different in his mouth, shaped by the Italian pronunciation. Buonanotte. Buonanotte, I replied automatically, then bit my lip, cursing myself for responding in Italian again. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth, and then he was gone, the other men following him out like a procession of well-dressed shadows. I looked at the receipt and nearly dropped it. The tip was $1,200 on a $4,000 tab, 30%. More money than I made in 2 weeks. Holy shit, Marco breathed, appearing at my elbow. Do you know what you just did? Served dinner? My voice came out higher than I intended. You spoke Italian. You answered a call in Italian in front of Vincent Castellano. He ran his hair through his hair, looking slightly manic. Emma, he's been looking for a translator. His usual guy had a stroke last month. He's been trying to find someone who speaks fluent Italian, someone he can trust. The pieces started clicking together in my mind, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Marco, I just serve drinks. I can't. Emma, he gripped my arm. Mr. Castellano wants to see you before you leave. He's in the office. My stomach plummeted. Now. The office was at the back of the restaurant, past the kitchen, down a hallway I'd never been allowed in before. Marco knocked once, then gestured for me to enter alone. I stepped through the door on legs that felt like water. The office was small but elegant, all dark wood and leather. Vincent Castellano sat behind a massive desk, his jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked with what looked like a scar running from wrist to elbow. A large man stood by the door, hands clasped in front of him, face impassive. Security. Or muscle. Probably both. Sit, per favore, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat, my back rigid, hands folded in my lap to hide their shaking. Is something wrong with the service if I made a mistake? You speak Italian like a native, he interrupted, his dark eyes never leaving my face. Where did you learn? My grandmother. She was from Tuscany. I grew up bilingual. Yet your English has almost no accent. My father was American, 3rd-generation Italian-American, but American. I swallowed hard. Is this about the phone call? I'm so sorry. I know we're not supposed to take personal calls during service. He waved a hand, dismissing my apology. The call. That was the billing department at the hospice.
I widened my eyes. How did you... I heard enough of your conversation. They're harassing you about bills from your grandmother's care. Not a question, a statement. I didn't respond, couldn't respond. The weight of the last year pressed down on me. Nana's illness, her death, the crushing debt, Derek, the restraining order, the fear that had become my constant companion. Something shifted in Castellano's expression. Not quite sympathy, but something. He opened a drawer and removed a folder, sliding it across the desk toward me. "Open it," he said softly. With trembling hands, I flipped open the folder. Inside was a check made out to Mercy Hospice Care for the full amount of my outstanding balance, $11,347. More money than I'd seen in one place in my entire life. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I need a translator," Castellano said, leaning back in his chair. "Someone who speaks fluent Italian, someone who understands both cultures, both worlds, someone I can trust. There are professional services, agencies that... I don't want an agency. I want someone authentic, someone who needs the work badly enough to be discreet." His eyes bored into mine. "Someone like you." The implications hung in the air between us. He'd looked into me already. Somehow,
in the space of a few hours, he'd found out about my grandmother, my debt, probably everything about my life. "What kind of translation work?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Business meetings, some travel to New York, possibly Italy, nothing that would put you in danger. I simply need someone who can navigate conversations when I'm meeting with associates who prefer to speak Italian." He paused. 2 weeks. Trial period. The check covers your grandmother's debt. I'll also pay you $5,000 a week for your time. $10,000 for 2 weeks of work. It was impossible. It was too much. It was exactly what I needed. Why me? I forced myself to meet his gaze. Really? He studied me for a long moment. "Because you're educated, because you're desperate, because you have no family connections in Chicago that would complicate things." His voice dropped. "And because when I asked around about you, everyone said the same thing. You keep your head down, you're invisible. That's valuable to me." There it was again. Invisible. The thing I'd cultivated so carefully. Now it was being offered back to me as an asset, a reason to step into something I didn't understand. "I need to think about it," I said, standing on shaky legs. "Of course." He pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. "My personal number. Call me by tomorrow night with your answer." I took the card, our fingers brushing for just a second. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through me, something I definitely didn't want to name. "Emma," he said as I turned to leave. "That man. The one texting you tonight. The one outside the restaurant." My blood turned to ice. "How did you..." "He noticed things, and I make it my business to protect my investments." His expression darkened. "If you work for me, he won't bother you again. I promise you that." It should have terrified me. The casual certainty in his voice, the implication that he could make problems disappear. But instead, I felt something close to relief. I left the office, past the silent bodyguard, through the kitchen that was now being cleaned by the night crew, out into the main restaurant where Marco was waiting for my coat and my purse. "What did he say?" Marco asked. He offered me a job." "Are you going to take it?" I looked down at the check in my hand, at the business card with Vincent Castellano's number embossed in black on the thick cream cardstock. Through the front windows, I could see Derek's car parked across the street, could see him sitting in the driver's seat, watching the restaurant entrance. "I don't know," I said. But I did know. I'd known the moment Castellano promised Derek wouldn't bother me again. I'd known when I saw that check. That impossible lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. I just didn't know yet what it was going to cost me. The December rain had turned to sleet by the time I left the restaurant through the back entrance, the one Marco showed me, the one that opened into an alley where delivery trucks parked during the day. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my umbrella. Not from the cold,
from fear, from possibility, from the weight of the check in my purse that could wipe out a year's worth of crushing debt. My apartment was 45 minutes away on the L, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek was still out there somewhere, watching, waiting. I stood under the meager shelter of the restaurant's back awning, trying to decide if I should call a rideshare or risk the train, when a black SUV pulled into the alley, its headlights cutting through the slate, the rear window rolled down, and Vincent Castellano's face appeared in the dim light. "Get in," he said. Not a request. Every instinct I'd developed over the past 3 months screamed at me to run. Don't get in cars with strange men. Even rich ones. Even ones who just handed you $11,000. Especially ones who made Marco nervous. Especially ones who somehow knew about Derek without you telling them.
But Derek was out there somewhere, and this man had promised protection. I got in. The interior of the SUV was warm, leather seats heated against the Chicago winter. Castellano sat on one side, I took the other, careful to keep as much distance between us as the space allowed. A different man was driving, not the bodyguard from the office, but someone equally large and silent. "Where do you live?" Castellano asked. "Pilsen, near 18th Street. I clutched my purse in my lap. "You don't have to drive me. I can take the train." At 2 in the morning, with that man looking for you? His tone was matter-of-fact, not condescending. "Tell Anthony your address." I rattled off my address to the driver, then fell silent, hyper-aware of Castellano's presence beside me. He smelled like that cedar cologne and expensive scotch, and when I glanced sideways at him, I noticed details I'd missed in the restaurant. A small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his watch caught the passing street lights, Patek Philippe, probably worth more than my entire education, the controlled stillness of someone who'd learned to never waste movement. "You're afraid of me," he observed after several minutes of silence. "I'm cautious," I corrected. "Smart." He turned to look at me fully. "You should be cautious. I'm not a good man, Emma. I won't pretend to be." The honesty was more unsettling than a lie would have been. Then why offer to help me? "Because I need something you have. Because helping you serves my interests." He paused. "And because your grandmother was Anna Russo." My head snapped toward him. "How do you know Nona's name?" "My father knew a man named Antonio Russo. They worked together in Boston in the 80s before I was born. Antonio died in 1987. Your grandmother moved to Chicago shortly after, raised her son, your father, alone." Castellano's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "When I saw your name on the employee records, I was curious. When I had you investigated and confirmed you were Antonio's granddaughter, I became interested." The casual mention of having me investigated should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something click into place, a piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. "Nona never talked about my grandfather. She said he died before my father was born, and she didn't like to remember. He died protecting my father. That's a debt my family never repaid." Castellano's voice carried a weight I couldn't quite interpret. So, when I saw an opportunity to help Antonio Russo's granddaughter, I took it. We were crossing the bridge over the Chicago River now, the water black and churning below us. The city looked different from inside this warm, expensive car, less hostile, less overwhelming. "What happened to your grandmother was wrong," Castellano continued. "Hospice care should be free, not something that destroys families financially. The American healthcare system is predatory." He said it with the certainty of someone who'd never had to worry about money, but who'd watched others suffer. "I can't fix the system, but I can fix your problem. And in exchange, I translate for you for 2 weeks? In exchange, you give me 2 weeks to prove that working for me isn't as dangerous as you think it is, and then you decide if you want to continue."
The SUV pulled up in front of my building, a 3-story walk-up that had been nice about 60 years ago. The street was empty, silent except for the sleet tapping against the windshield. Castellano said as I reached for the door handle, "Think about my offer. Call me tomorrow, but Emma." I turned back. "Whether you work for me or not, that check is yours. The debt is paid, and Derek Holloway won't bother you anymore." The use of Derek's full name sent ice through my veins. "What are you going to do to him?" "Nothing violent, nothing illegal." A cold smile played at Castellano's lips. "Just make it very clear that harassing you is no longer in his best interests." I should have protested, should have said something about handling my own problems, about not needing a white knight, about the wrongness of using intimidation, even against someone who deserved it. Instead, I just nodded and got out of the SUV. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed in my studio apartment with its one window that looked out on a brick wall, listening to my neighbor's baby cry through the thin walls, and I thought about choices. I could go back to Luminosa tomorrow and pretend tonight never happened. Keep my 3 jobs, my crushing debt, my constant fear of Derek showing up drunk and angry, keep being invisible, keep surviving instead of living. Or I could call Vincent Castellano and step into something I didn't understand. Take his money, translate his meetings, exist in his world for 2 weeks and see what happened. The check was on my nightstand. I picked it up, studied the bold signature, the amount that would change everything. He'd said the debt was paid whether I worked for him or not, but I knew how these things worked. Debts of gratitude were just as binding as debts of money, maybe more so. My phone buzzed. 3:47 a.m. A text from an unknown number. "Your grandmother used to make sfogliatelle every Sunday. She would add extra orange zest. My father said they were the best he'd ever tasted. VC." I stared at the message, tears suddenly burning my eyes. Nona had made sfogliatelle every Sunday morning. She had added extra orange zest, said it was her secret. I'd been 12 the last time I tasted them before arthritis made it impossible for her to do the intricate folding the pastry required. How did he know that? What else did he know? What had his father told him about my grandfather, about Nona, about secrets I'd never been allowed to hear? I called the number on his card. He answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting. "I'll do it. 2 weeks, trial period." Good. There was satisfaction in his voice, but also something else. "I'll send a car for you tomorrow at noon. Pack for a week. We're going to New York." "Tomorrow? I have work tomorrow. 3 shifts." "I've already handled it. Marco knows you won't be returning to Luminosa. Your other jobs have been compensated for lost wages. You work for me now, Emma. Only me." The possessiveness in those last 2 words should have sent me running. Instead, I felt something shift in my chest, a dangerous thrill I absolutely could not afford. "Okay," I whispered. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow your life changes." He hung up before I could respond. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, wondering what the hell I'd just agreed to. I didn't know then that he was right. Tomorrow, my life would change. In 2 weeks, I'd be in so deep I'd never find my way back out. And in 6 months, I'd be married to the most dangerous man in Chicago, standing beside him in a world I'd once sworn I'd never touch. But that was later. That night, I was just a girl with a dead grandmother, a canceled restraining order that never worked anyway, and a check that promised a future I'd stopped believing in. I fell asleep as dawn broke over Chicago, the sleet finally turning to snow, and I dreamed of my Nona's kitchen, of sfogliatelle fresh from the oven, of orange zest and powdered sugar, and the way she'd smile when she handed me the first one, still warm.
In my dream, Vincent Castellano sat at her kitchen table, and Nana was telling him about my grandfather, about Antonio, about secrets I'd never been allowed to hear. When I woke, I had 3 text messages. The first was from Derek. "I know what you did. We're not done." The second was from an unknown number with a screenshot of a police report. Derek had been arrested at 4 a.m. for possession of cocaine, resisting arrest, and violation of parole from a prior DUI conviction I'd never known about. He was looking at 2 to 5 years. The third was from Castellano. You're safe now. See you at noon. VC. I should have been terrified by the efficiency of it. The casual way he destroyed a man's life with what I assumed was a phone call. Should have recognized the danger in someone with that much power, that much reach. Instead, for the first time in 3 months, I felt like I could breathe. At 11:30, I stood at my window watching the street below. The snow had continued through the morning, quoting Chicago in white that would be gray slush by afternoon. I had packed a suitcase with my nicest clothes, which weren't very nice. Business casual from Target, a black dress I'd worn to Nana's funeral, the pearl earring she'd left me. Everything I owned fit into one medium suitcase with room to spare. At exactly noon, a black SUV pulled up to my building. Same vehicle as last night, but a different driver emerged. A woman this time, petite and professional in a dark suit, her black hair pulled into a severe bun. She looked up at my window like she knew exactly which one was mine. I grabbed my suitcase and my purse, took one last look at the apartment that had been my refuge and my prison for 3 months, and left. The woman was waiting by the SUV when I emerged from the building. Ms. Russo, I'm Sophia Chen, Mr. Castellano's personal assistant. Let me take your bag. I can manage, I started, but she had already plucked the suitcase from my hand with surprising strength for someone who couldn't weigh more than 100 pounds. Mr. Castellano is very particular about his employees being treated well, Sophia said as she loaded my bag into the back. Please, get in. We're heading to the airport. The interior was just as warm as last night, but this time there was a garment bag laid carefully across the back seat, along with several shopping bags from stores I'd only ever walked past. What's all this? I asked as Sophia slid into the driver's seat. Mr. Castellano thought you might need some additional items for the trip. Business attire appropriate for the meetings in New York and some evening wear for a dinner he has scheduled. Her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. I asked him to ensure everything was your size. I hope I got it right. I unzipped the garment bag with trembling fingers. Inside was a suit in charcoal gray, perfectly tailored with a silk blouse in cream. The label was Theory. The price tag had been removed, but I'd worked retail in college. This suit cost at least $1,000. I can't accept this, I said. Mr. Castellano anticipated you'd say that. He asked me to tell you that proper attire is part of your job requirements, not a gift. You're representing his business interests. You need to look the part. The distinction was clear. This wasn't charity. This was uniform. Somehow that made it easier to accept. The drive to O'Hare took 40 minutes in midday traffic. Sophia drove in silence, giving me time to examine the other bags. Shoes, Louboutin heels in black. A second outfit, this one a dress in deep navy. Makeup from Sephora. Jewelry, simple but expensive pieces that looked real. How did he know my size? I asked finally. Mr. Castellano is very thorough. There was something in Sophia's tone. Not quite a warning, but close. He makes it his business to know details. We didn't go to the main terminal. Instead, Sophia drove directly to the private aviation section of O'Hare, past security checkpoints where guards waved us through without question, onto the tarmac where a sleek white jet waited, its engines already humming. This is his plane? My voice came out higher than intended. One of them? The Gulfstream is better for longer trips. This one's the Citation for shorter hops. Sophia parked beside the jet and came around to open my door. Mr. Castellano is already on board. The stairs leading up to the jet were covered in red carpet, protected from the snow by a small awning. I climbed them on legs that felt unsteady, my mind reeling. Private jets, custom-tailored suits, assistants who drive SUVs with the efficiency of Secret Service agents. What had I gotten myself into? The interior of the jet was all cream leather and polished wood, 8 seats that looked more like recliners, a sofa area, and what appeared to be a small bedroom at the rear.
Vincent Castellano sat in one of the seats, a laptop open in front of him, his attention focused on whatever was on the screen. He'd changed since last night. Dark jeans, a black sweater that probably cost more than my rent, and no jacket. He looked younger this way, less intimidating, almost normal. Almost. He looked up as I entered, his dark eyes doing that same assessing sweep they'd done last night. Emma? Good, we're cleared for takeoff in 10 minutes. Choose a seat. Mr. Castellano. Vincent, if you're going to work for me, we need to establish some ground rules. First, you call me Vincent. Mr. Castellano makes me feel like my father. I sat in the seat across from him, still clutching my purse like a lifeline. Vincent, then, I need to understand what exactly I'm doing in New York. What kind of business meetings require a translator? I'm acquiring a restaurant group based in Little Italy. The owner is third-generation Italian, old school, refuses to speak English in business meetings, even though he's fluent. Says it's a matter of principle. He's also suspicious of lawyers and contracts, prefers to do things the old way. Handshake deals, conversations over dinner, building trust before money changes hands. It sounded legitimate, almost reasonable, except for the way Sophia had looked at me in the car, except for what Marco had said about Vincent's other businesses. And after New York? I asked. It depends on how the meetings go. Possibly Italy in a few weeks if we move forward with expanding the restaurant group internationally. But let's focus on this week first. We have 3 dinners scheduled, 1 lunch meeting, and a gallery opening. Gallery opening? A small smile played at his lips. I thought you might enjoy it. Plus, the man I'm negotiating with collects modern Italian art. It's his passion. Showing interest in his collection builds rapport. The jet accelerated down the runway, and I gripped the armrests without thinking. I'd flown commercial a dozen times, but never in something this small, this fast. The takeoff felt different, steeper, more aggressive. First time in a private jet? Vincent asked, watching my white knuckles. First time in anything this small. We'll be in New York in 90 minutes. Try to relax. But relaxing was impossible. As Chicago fell away beneath us, revealing the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan and the snow-covered suburbs beyond, I felt reality shifting. 12 hours ago, I'd been a waitress, worried about rent and restraining orders. Now I was in a private jet, wearing clothes that cost thousands of dollars, traveling to New York with a man who'd made my ex-boyfriend disappear with a phone call. I looked you up, Vincent said, once we'd reached cruising altitude, after I saw your name on the employment records, before I decided to approach you. I figured. Emma Grace Russo. Born in Boston, raised in Chicago after your father got a job as an engineer at Boeing when you were 6. Mother died of cancer when you were 13. Father remarried 2 years later. You didn't get along with your stepmother. He recited the facts like he was reading from a file. Full ride to Northwestern, bachelor's in art history, master's in Italian Renaissance art. Graduated top of your class, got a job at the Whitmore Gallery in North River. That's where you met Derek Holloway.
My stomach clenched. How much do you know? Enough. His expression darkened. He was a trader, made good money, came from the right family, looked perfect on paper. You dated for 2 years before you moved in together. And then it started. I couldn't look at him, couldn't face the pity or judgment or whatever I'd see in those dark eyes. It wasn't always bad, I heard myself say. At first, it was just jealousy. Didn't like me going out with friends. Wanted to know where I was all the time. I thought it meant he cared. It meant he wanted to control you. The flatness in Vinton's voice made me look up. There was no pity there. Just cold fury directed at someone who wasn't in the room. When did it turn physical? He asked. About 6 months after I moved in. He'd been drinking, accused me of flirting with a client at the gallery opening, grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. I touched my wrist unconsciously, remembering. He cried after, said he was sorry, said it would never happen again. I believed him. It happened again. 3 more times, each one worse than the last. The final time, he choked me until I passed out. When I woke, he was still there, still screaming. My voice sounded detached, clinical, like I was telling someone else's story. That's when I left, packed 2 suitcases while he was at work, took what money I had, and disappeared. You filed a restraining order. For all the good it did. He violated it twice before he was arrested last night. The police said there wasn't enough evidence to do anything, told me to keep documenting incidents, stay away from him, all the useless advice they give women in my situation. Vincent was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but there was something lethal underneath. Derek Holloway is currently sitting in Cook County Jail. The cocaine they found in his car was real. I had nothing to do with that. He's been buying from a dealer in Lincoln Park for months. I simply made sure the police knew where to find him at the right time. And the parole violation? That was real too. DUI from 2019 that he managed to keep off most background checks. His lawyer got him a suspended sentence with 3 years of probation. Possessing cocaine is an automatic violation. Vincent's smile was cold. He'll take a plea deal, 2 years minimum, and when he gets out, he'll have bigger problems to worry about than you. I should have asked what that meant, should have pushed for details, but I didn't want to know. Didn't want to acknowledge that I was sitting across from a man who could casually destroy someone's life because it served his interests. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me. I told you, it serves my interests to keep you safe and focused on your work." But something in his expression suggested there was more to it than that. Besides, men like Derek Holloway deserve what they get. A flight attendant appeared. When had she gotten on the plane? With coffee and small pastries. I took the coffee gratefully, needing something to do with my hands. "Tell me about your grandfather," Vincent said after the attendant disappeared again. "What did your grandmother tell you about him?" The change of subject was jarring, but I welcomed it. "Almost nothing. She said he died before my father was born, that he was a good man who'd made bad choices, that she loved him but couldn't stand Boston after he was gone. She never explained what the bad choices were, and after a while I stopped asking. Antonio Russo worked for my father in the 80s, not in the restaurants. My father hadn't started those yet. In the other businesses. The ones we don't talk about directly. He was reliable, smart, loyal. My father trusted him completely. What happened? He died in the hospital 3 days later. Your grandmother was 5 months pregnant with your father. My father gave her money, set her up in Chicago with a new identity, made sure she and the baby were provided for, but she refused to take more than the minimum. Said she wanted nothing to do with that life. The pieces were clicking together now. That's why you felt obligated to help me. Because your father owed my grandfather a debt. My father felt guilty his entire life. He tried to reach out to your grandmother over the years, but she always refused contact. After she got sick, he tried again, offered to pay for her care. She said no. She died before he could convince her otherwise. My father died 6 months later. Heart attack. And I inherited all his unfinished business. Including debts of honor to dead men's families. Including that. We were somewhere over Pennsylvania now. The landscape below, a patchwork of snow and brown fields. The coffee was making me jittery, but maybe that was just the adrenaline of the last 24 hours finally hitting me. "Can I ask you something?" I said. Vincent nodded. "Marco told me you own restaurants, real estate. He also implied there were other businesses, less legal ones." I forced myself to hold his gaze. "If I'm going to work for you, I need to know what I'm getting involved in. The truth." He studied me for a long moment, like he was deciding how much to tell me. My father built an empire that exists in 2 worlds. The legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, import and export companies, and the less legitimate ones, gambling, loan sharking, protection services.
Some things that cross legal lines but exist in gray areas. Like what? Like helping people who can't get traditional loans because their credit is destroyed, or providing security for businesses in dangerous neighborhoods when the police won't, or running card games for rich men who like the thrill of illegal poker. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not going to lie to you, Emma. Some of what my father built was criminal. I've been working for 5 years to move everything into legitimate territory, but it's complicated. You don't just walk away from certain relationships. And the restaurant deal in New York, that's legitimate? Completely. I'm trying to expand the legal side of the business. Eventually, that's all there will be. But right now, I still have obligations. Old connections I can't cut without consequences, which is why I need someone who can navigate both worlds. Someone educated enough to handle the legitimate business, but invisible enough not to attract attention from the wrong people. There it was again. Invisible, but this time it felt less like a survival skill and more like a liability. What if I want to be visible? I asked quietly. What if I'm tired of being invisible? Vincent's expression shifted, something like approval flickering in those dark eyes. Then maybe you're exactly what I need. Someone who can be invisible when it serves us, but who has the spine to stand out when necessary. The jet began its descent into Teterboro, the private airport in New Jersey that serves Manhattan. Through the window, I could see the New York skyline emerging from the winter haze, buildings stacked like a concrete mountain range against a gray sky. Where are we staying? I asked. I keep a place in Tribeca, 4-bedroom penthouse. You'll have your own room, your own space. He must have seen something in my expression because he added, I'm not expecting anything from you except professional translation services, Emma. Whatever you think this is, it's not that. But the way he looked at me suggested it could become that, if I let him. And God help me, part of me did want it. Wanted to step into this dangerous and glittering world and see what happened. Wanted to be the kind of woman who flew on private jets and wore $1,000 suits and didn't flinch when powerful men make problems disappear. Wanted to stop being invisible and start being someone else entirely. The someone Nona had warned me my grandfather was. The someone who made bad choices but lived fully anyway. The jet touched down so smoothly I barely felt it. As we taxied to the private terminal, Vincent closed his laptop and stood, shrugging into a black overcoat that made him look like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. First dinner is tonight at 8. Angelo Marchetti, the restaurant owner I am negotiating with, his daughter, Bianca, will be there. She's taking over the business from him. She speaks perfect English, but Angelo refuses to. He handed me a folder. Background on both of them, the restaurant group's financials, everything you might need to know.
I took the folder, my hand steadier now. And what's my cover story? Why am I here? The truth, you're my translator. Angelo knows I've been looking for someone since my previous translator had a stroke. He'll be suspicious if we try to hide your role. Vincent's phone buzzed and he glanced at it, frowning. Sophia's sending a car for us. We should be at the apartment in 30 minutes. The terminal was smaller than O'Hare's private section, but no less luxurious. We walked through without stopping, Vincent's hand at the small of my back again, a gesture I was starting to recognize as habitual with him. Possessive, but not aggressive, a claiming that felt both dangerous and reassuring. A black Mercedes SUV waited outside, driver already holding the door open. He nodded to Vincent with clear respect, and I realized this was Vincent's world, a world where people snapped to attention when he arrived, where doors opened before he reached them, where his path was smoothed by invisible hands. The drive into Manhattan was quiet. Vincent worked on his phone while I stared out the window, watching New Jersey give way to the Holland Tunnel, then emerge into the organized chaos of lower Manhattan. It was Friday afternoon, the streets clogged with taxis and delivery trucks and people bundled against the cold. We pulled up in front of a glass and steel building on a quiet Tribeca street. The lobby was all modern art and marble, with a doorman who greeted Vincent by name. "Welcome back, Mr. Castellano, and this must be Miss Russo. We've prepared the guest suite for her." The elevator required a key, which Vincent produced from his pocket. We rode in silence to the top floor, the only floor the elevator accessed. The doors opened directly into the penthouse. I'd seen luxury apartments in magazines and movies. This exceeded all of that. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River and the Manhattan skyline. Open floor plan with a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a restaurant. Living area with furniture that was probably Italian and definitely cost more than a car. Art on the walls that I recognized. A Fontana slash painting, a Burry combustion piece, a small de Chirico that might have been an original. "Your room is down that hall, second door on the left," Vincent said, pointing. "My room is the master at the end. Sophia has an apartment in the building, but she's rarely here. There's a guest room and an office you can use if you need privacy." I walked down the hall, past the first door, closed, to the second. The room was easily twice the size of my studio apartment. King bed with white linens, another wall of windows with views of the city, a sitting area with a small sofa. The ensuite bathroom had both a shower and a soaking tub. My suitcase was already there, along with the garment bags from the car. On the bed lay a new phone, iPhone, latest model. "That's for business," Vincent said from the doorway, making me jump. "Your personal phone is fine to keep, but this one has everything you'll need. My number, Sophia's, our driver Anthony, the restaurant reservations for tonight. It's secure, encrypted. You think someone might be listening to my calls? I think in my world you can't be too careful." He checked his watch. "It's 3 now. Dinner is at 8 at Marchetti's restaurant in Little Italy. I'd suggest you wear the navy dress. Angelo is old-fashioned. He'll appreciate the modesty." "And what do I need to know about him beyond what's in this folder?" Vincent leaned against the doorframe, his expression serious. "Angelo Marchetti is 73 years old. His father came over from Naples in 1952, started with a single pizza place, built it into 6 restaurants across Manhattan and Brooklyn. Angelo took over in 1985. He's old school in every way. Cash business, family loyalty, doesn't trust banks or lawyers. His daughter Bianca has been trying to modernize for years, but he resists. Why does he want to sell? He doesn't. Bianca does. She knows the business is dying because her father refuses to adapt. She's convinced him to at least meet with buyers." Vincent's smile was thin. "I'm offering him a deal where he retains minority ownership and stays on as a consultant. It lets him save face, keeps the family name on the restaurants, but gives me operational control. And if he says no, then I move on to my second choice. But I want these restaurants. They're prime real estate in neighborhoods that are gentrifying. The food is authentic, the reputation solid. With proper management and capital investment, they could be hugely profitable." He paused. "Also, Angelo Marchetti knew my father. They did business together in the 80s. This acquisition matters to me personally." The implication hung in the air. The business they did together probably wasn't just restaurants. "Get some rest," Vincent said, pushing off from the doorframe. "I'll knock on your door at 7:30. And Emma." He waited until I looked at him. "You did well today. Better than I expected." He left before I could respond, closing the door softly behind him. I stood in the center of my temporary bedroom, looking out at Manhattan spread before me like a promise or a threat. And I thought about my grandmother, about how she'd fled this city, this life, after my grandfather died. How she'd chosen visibility and safety over whatever world Antonio Russo had inhabited. How I was choosing the opposite. My old phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Sophia. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call. Welcome to the team. SC." The new phone Vincent had given me remained silent on the bed, black and sleek and expensive, waiting for me to pick it up and fully commit to this new life. I picked it up. It felt cold and heavy in my hand, a tether to the world Vincent commanded, a symbol of the commitment I was making to step out of the shadows and into the blinding, complicated light. I scrolled through the few preloaded contacts, Vincent Russo, his cryptic assistant M, and now Sophia Conti, my new team. The people who understood that in this city, every action had an implication, and every relationship came with a price tag. I took a deep breath, the view of the glowing skyscrapers reflecting in the phone's black screen. My grandmother chose to run. I was choosing to fight. Whether the restaurants were a legitimate business venture or a stepping stone in a more dangerous game involving my father's past with Angelo Marchetti, I was no longer afraid of the answer. I unlocked the screen, the bright display illuminating the determination in my eyes. I didn't call Vincent. I didn't text Sophia. Instead, I opened the browser and typed in 3 words. Angelo Marchetti, restaurants. The results flushed up, detailing the solid reputation, the prime locations, the history.
I clicked on an old photo, a young, short-eyed Angelo standing next to an older man with a familiar, charismatic grin. My father. The image was a ghost from the past, a silent contract signed decades ago. The acquisition wasn't just business, it was a debt being collected, a history being reclaimed. I knew in that moment that getting the deal done was only the beginning. It would open a door. And on the other side lay not just profit, but answers. And sometimes, answers were the most dangerous currency of all. I set the new phone down, the contract in my hand now a promise, a challenge, and a path forward. I would meet Vincent at 7:30 a.m., but when I did, I would no longer be just Emma, the assistant, the outsider. I was Antonio Russo's daughter, ready to take back what was ours.